Okay. Namaskar. Good evening, everyone. Subhidhan, आज को क्लास से we talk about the second historical approach, that is the direct method. Okay, see it. What is the direct method of language teaching? The topic is direct method of language teaching. Direct method of language teaching. Some key points of it. Please note down whatever I do write here on the board. Or direct method of language teaching. What is direct method? This direct method, it came into practice as a contrasting. It revolved as a reaction against it, contradictory to. This method is contradictory to grammar translation method. You have to see the major assumptions, features, and practices of grammar translation method have been denied by direct method. Direct method is called natural method. It means that language learning is possible in natural way. Even the second language learning is possible, like that of the first language acquisition. Direct method doesn't trust in translation. Use of target language only. Use of target language only. Use of target language only. If you want to teach any target language, do not rely on native language. There is no need of using any native language. It believes that use of target language only, and it is contradictory to grammar translation method. It is a natural method of teaching language. If you want to teach English and any other foreign or second languages, you need to rely only on the target language, and this method is slightly a communicative approach. The birth of communicative approaches that appeared in language teaching in the later section of its historical development are deeply rooted in the practices, assumptions, features, and development of direct method. That is what you have to see. And next thing is that in direct method, it has other different name as well. It is called anti-grammatical method. Its name is anti-grammatical method. We call it anti-grammatical method as well. And the next point is that this method, direct method, is also called, we give different name to it, and some people call it reform method. It has three distinct names. It is a reform method, it is an anti-grammatical method, it is a natural method, and this method was originated in Germany and France in the 19th century. This method started in the 19th century. This method started in the 19th century in Germany and France. This method started in the 19th century in Germany and France. You have to say these things. I'm talking about the brief introduction of direct method. That's why direct method is contradictory to grammar translation method. This method is called a natural method. This method prescribes only the use of direct language while teaching language. This is a kind of anti-grammatical method of language teaching. We know this method as a reform method, and this method started in the 19th century in Germany and France. And this method, it gives focus on the development of oral skills. It gives focuses on development of oral skills. Now you have to see development of oral skills. It gives emphasis on emphasis on development of oral skills. You have to see it gives emphasis on development of oral skills. And another thing is that in this method, teacher demonstrate a variety of teaching materials. It is a direct method of teaching language. It doesn't teach about language. Meaning is conveyed directly in direct method. And in this method, demonstration, use of demonstration and visual aid. You have to see use of demonstration. In this method, use of demonstration and visual aids. Visual aids. Now see, this is a brief introduction of direct method. In direct method, there is no use of any native language. The teachers are not allowed to use their native languages. Instead of explaining and describing subject matters in detail, in this method, the teachers have to demonstrate activities. The teachers have to use different visual audio materials and like that. At the same time, students are to conduct different kind of speaking activities in the classroom. And this method argues that language learning is related to learning speaking. It gives priority to speaking. If you become capable to read and write, that is not the major concern of learning language. Learning language means to be capable to use it in speaking form. That's why language is primarily speech. It is a belief of it is it is an assumption of this method. And the purpose of language learning is communication. Why to learn language? According to direct method, language learning is for communication. And in this method, language skills are not separately taught. All language skills are integrated, and students learn vocabulary, grammar, language rules, and language skills at the same time without any kind of separate teaching of them. And at the very beginning of language teaching, pronunciation is paid higher attention in direct method. Now, only let me tell slowly and gradually. Now, only remember that in grammar translation, in direct method, there is use of target language only. This direct method is anti-grammatical method. It is a reform method. It started in the 19th century in Germany and France. Now, what we don't do in grammar method, direct method, what not in big no in direct method, what we don't do in direct method, what we don't do in direct method. Now you have to say what we don't do in direct method. What we don't do in direct method. हामीले अब direct method मा के गर्दैनौं. What we don't do in direct method. What we don't do in direct method. Direct method मा के गर्दैनौं. What we don't do in direct method. The first thing is that in direct method, use of native language. Big no. Big no. What are the big no's? तपाईले के कुराहरु डाइरेक्ट मेथडमा गर्नुहुन्न. First thing is that translation. In direct method, you don't do translation. Use of native language. In direct method, you don't use native language while teaching. Translation is not allowed. If you teach through and by direct method, translation is not allowed. The second point is the teachers are not allowed to use native language. Bilingual situation is not created in the classroom. If the teachers need to teach, if the teachers require teaching English language, then they need to use only the English language. They are not allowed to switch from Nepali to English language frequently and repeatedly. The only thing is that the teachers had to use native language in the classroom while performing different demonstrations, while using teaching materials, while explaining the teaching content, and while convincing students, and even at the time of conducting group activities and other things, the teachers are to use only native language. That's why in this method, in direct method, there is use of native language. And next thing is that no grammar teaching. Don't teach grammar consciously. Do not teach grammar consciously. No grammar teaching. Next thing is that in this method, no deductive approach of grammar teaching. Deductive approach of grammar teaching. We don't do it in it. Deductive approach of grammar teaching. Deductive approach of grammar teaching. In this method, we do not follow deductive approach of grammar teaching. Next thing is that rule explanation and description. In this method, rule explanation and description. Rule explanation and description. These are next thing is that separate teaching of language skills. Separate teaching of language skills. You don't do it. And next thing is teacher-centered teaching. Next point is teacher-centered teaching. Teacher-centered teaching. Now you have to see in direct method. In direct method, translation is not allowed. In direct method, teachers cannot use native language. In direct method, you cannot go through lengthy discussion of grammatical rules. Don't teach grammar consciously. When your students require some information, if they pose question to you, if they need some kind of guideline for error correction and correcting their mistakes, only at the time you can prescribe them, you can suggest to them, and you can tell them for grammar correction. That's why consciously we don't teach grammar if we follow direct method of teaching. And the next concept is that in direct method, we don't follow any deductive approach of grammar teaching. We have two approaches of grammar teaching. One is inductive approach. This inductive approach is slightly student oriented, and next one is deductive approach. In deductive approach, the already established rules, norms, principles are applied into specific cases. That's why if you follow deductive approach of grammar teaching, your students do not make a sense of language learning, and language learning becomes a complex phenomenon at the time. That's why don't use any deductive approach of grammar teaching under direct method. And the next thing is that rule explanation and description. In direct method, rule explanations and descriptions that are not necessary. Under when you provide different situations, when you conduct problem solving activities, when you assign speaking activities in the classroom, your students, they develop communicative competence slowly and gradually. That's why under direct method, we never imagine the application of rule explanation and description activities in teaching learning activities. And next thing is that in this method, there is no chance of separate teaching of language skills. All these are the features of grammar translation method. That's why I have told big no. You have to say big no to all these things. Separate teaching of language skills and teacher-centered teaching. Then what are the features of direct method then? What are the features of direct method? Let me point out here. What are the features of direct method in language teaching? Now you have to make a point of them. Direct features of direct method. What are the features? Okay, see. Features of direct method. Features of direct method. Now see here. What are the features of direct method? First one is use of target language alone. Use of target language alone. Use of target language alone. The first feature is use of. Next one is everyday vocabulary and sentence are taught. Teaching of everyday vocabulary. Teaching of everyday vocabulary, and next one is sentences. In this method, teaching of everyday vocabulary and sentences. And next one is, in this method, you have to see inductive approach of grammar teaching. Even if you need to teach grammar, inductive approach of grammar teaching. Inductive approach of grammar teaching. Inductive approach of grammar teaching. In direct method, we follow inductive approach of grammar teaching. You have to see in this method, you have to follow inductive approach of grammar teaching. Another feature. And next one is focus on oral skills. Focus on oral skills. This method, it focuses on oral skills. And next thing is that this method, in this method, you have to see vocabulary is taught through demonstration, objects, and pictures. Vocabulary is taught through, we have many ways of, through demonstration. Vocabulary is taught through demonstration. Vocabulary is taught through demonstration, objects and pictures. You have to see objects and pictures. Vocabulary is taught through demonstration, objects and pictures. And the next thing is that in this method as well, correct pronunciation and grammar are specified. Correct pronunciation is emphasized from the very beginning. In this method, you have to see correct pronunciation is emphasized. Correct pronunciation is emphasized from the very beginning. Now, let me explain them. Please point them out. Note them down here. Please do it fast. What are the features of target language? We have 10 to 15 features of this method. Use of target language alone. In direct method, we use only target language. Second thing is that there is a teaching of everyday vocabulary and sentences. The teachers do not teach reading passages and all these things. Teachers, they pay attention to teaching everyday vocabulary and sentences. Another thing is that inductive approach of grammar teaching is applied. In this method, inductive approach of grammar teaching is applied. Next one is, this method focuses on the use of oral skills. This method focuses on the use of oral skills. And another thing is that under this direct method, vocabulary is taught. It means vocabulary means word, to increase word power of students and to make students capable in selecting and arranging and applying different words. Vocabulary is taught through demonstration by using objects and pictures as well. Students, they learn and they gain and they improve their vocabulary power. And next thing is that correct pronunciation is emphasized. In this method, correct pronunciation is emphasized. This is another feature here. And next thing, you have to say that in this method, it is a natural way of, it pays attention to exposure to languages to environment, exposure to speaking activities in the classroom, priority to speaking activities, priority to speaking activities inside classroom, speaking activities, and to slightly, it is slightly, you can say that slightly a practice and slightly a practice based learning. It is slightly a practice based learning. Integration of language teaching at the time of teaching. Integration of language teaching. So integration of language skills at the time of teaching. Integration of language skills integration of language skills at the time of teaching. Next point is integration of language skills at the time of teaching. Under this direct method, teachers come to integrate language skills. All the four language skills that are integrated at the same time, language aspects, they are also integrated here. That's why priority is given to speaking activities. Priority is given to speaking activities, slightly a practice-based learning. You have to say that it is slightly a practice-based learning because as a foundation of communicative approach of language teaching, as a foundation of task-based language teaching, as a foundation of that are practice-based and project work method, this method, direct method, it believes that the more students get opportunities for speaking activities in the classroom, the more they learn language. That's why don't separate language teaching skills. If you teach listening at one point, and then you shift to speaking, if you teach reading and writing separately, and if you teach pronunciation, grammar, and sound differently, your students do not learn language. Listening, speaking, reading, writing, grammar, pronunciation, and other kind of language aspects, they are to be taught together. If you separate them, your students, they lack communicative competence. If they become capable in handling grammar questions, they lack language fluency. If they become capable to write something, they cannot read with a greater and expected level of momentum. That's why the thing is that when you teach language under and through and by applying direct method, you have to integrate. You have to give priority of speaking activities in the classroom. Speaking activities means you can conduct question answer, you can take brief interview of your students, you can ask your students for picture description and other kind of thing, you can involve your students in a description of bar graph and different histogram and pie chart and other different pictures and tables and all these things. It means that direct method thinks that language learning is for communication. We learn language not for any other purpose. Language learning is for both written and spoken form of communication, and you gain communicative power and competence only when you teach all language skills and aspects all together. That's why this thing gives priority to it. And next one is that another feature of this method is that do not use any kind of no need of explanations means demonstrations are given priority. While teaching language, you have to say that learning environment is created here. Learning environment is created. Learning environment is created. Direct and intensive exposure. Intensive exposure to direct and intensive exposure to, you have to say direct and intensive exposure to language used environment. Language used environment. Your students get opportunity for all these things. Direct and intensive exposure to language used environment. And next thing is that in this method, it gives it. Next thing is that use of a variety of teaching methods, use of audio visual aids, and at the same time, this method improvement in pronunciation, use of variety of, and this method believes that there is a need of now you have to see use of variety of use of variety of use of variety of teaching materials. Natural way, this thing, it believes that. And this thing that, another thing is fluency of speech. Priority to fluency. It gives priority to fluency. Practice-based learning instead of forceful memory. Practice-based learning instead of forceful memory. Instead of forceful memory. You have to say practice-based learning. Practice-based learning instead of forceful memory. You have to say forceful memory. Think about this. Use of variety of teaching materials. Variety of teaching materials are used in it. Priority to fluency. It gives priority to fluency. Practice-based learning instead of forceful memory. It gives priority to practice-based things. You have to say that this method, direct method, there is no need of having any kind of forceful memory. That's why these are the different features of direct method. What are the features of direct method? Now I told you these are the different features of direct method. Then what are the principles and features that are more or less common one? And next one is self-correction. Self-correction is prescribed. Prescription of self-correction. Self-correction. Self-correction by students. These are the different features of direct method. Okay, let me explain slightly and briefly. एकपटक म फेरि एक्सप्लेन गर्दिन्छु, तपाईहरु सुन्नुस्। भनेपछि कतिवटा पोइन्टहरु रहेछन् त। पहिलो कुरा के रहेछ त, डाइरेक्ट मेथड इज अ नेचुरल मेथड अफ ल्याङ्ग्वेज लर्निङ. If we call it anti-grammatical method, direct method appeared as a reaction against grammar translation method. Direct method is a foundation of all other modern language teaching methods and approaches. Direct method argues that teachers should use only native language in the classroom. Instead of rule explanation and deductive grammar teaching, teachers require demonstrating different activities and using variety of materials in the classroom. Language learning is not a forceful activity. Language learning becomes possible only when we expose our students to language used environment. Second language learning is possible in the similar manner like that of the first language acquisition because when we expose our students to language used environment, when we conduct speaking activities in the classroom, our students, they slowly and gradually, they learn language. That's why direct method, it claims that language learning is a natural way. For language learning, do not rely on translation, do not depend on native language, do not depend on that is rule explanation, do not depend on a deductive approach of grammar teaching, and do not depend on textbook, and do not follow what a teacher does in the classroom, because grammar translation method is totally a teacher centered method. That is only a descriptive approach of teaching. That is a rule governed method, and this method teaches about language. But direct method argues that teach English, do not teach about English. Teach directly, use direct language, do not speak your native language, and conduct a variety of teaching activities. Apply different teaching techniques in the classroom. Instead of lecture method and instead of that is illustration method, there are other hundreds of teaching activities that you need to apply in the classroom and create a better homely environment, because create such an environment in the classroom where your students can interact, where your students, they can exchange their communication, because language learning is for communication. Language learning is not for translation. Language learning is not for writing. Language learning is not for reading. Language learning is not creating gap between literary language and ordinary language, because whenever we talk about grammar translation method, we talk that grammar translation method pays higher attention to literary language. Literary language is paid over emphasis against ordinary language. But when we come to, or when we shift to this direct method, this language does not discriminate gap between ordinary and literary language. In this method, vocabulary is taught separately. Under direct method, integration is always available there. Language skills and language aspects are integrated under this method. That's why direct method is somehow, it is a modern method, though it is not a complete modern method. It is not a complete uh, communicative approach. It is not a contextual approach as well. But one thing is that direct method stood as a powerful reaction against the ongoing practices of grammar translation method. And this method, it came into practice in the early 19th century, and this method was used in France and Germany in the earlier days. Nowadays, everywhere teachers depend on direct method. Even when we teach English at school level, we depend on direct method. That's why these are the major features of direct method. Now, what are the advantages of this method? If someone asks you what are the advantages of direct method, you have to point them down. The first thing is that what are the advantages of direct method? Please note down. Advantages of direct method. Advantages of direct method. What are that? Advantages of direct method. The first one is it is a natural method. It is a natural method. You have to say it is a natural method. Direct method is a natural method. It gives fluency of speech. You have to see this method, it gives fluency of speech. Language class, by one of the advantages that language is taught by experienced teacher. It improves pronunciation. It improves pronunciation. This method improves pronunciation. This direct method, it improves pronunciation. You have to see this method improves pronunciation. You have to say this. It improves pronunciation. And another thing is that it facilitates literature learning. And next point is that it makes use of audio visual materials. Use of audio visual materials. Advantages is that slow and gradual learning. Next thing is that application of multiple teaching techniques. Application of multiple teaching techniques. Application of multiple teaching techniques. You have to see under direct method, you find all these things. It is a natural method. It gives fluency of speech. It improves pronunciation, use of audio-visual materials, application of multiple techniques. In this method, there we find application of these things, and the learners, they do not have any kind of fear. And this method gives priority to this method clarifies students' understanding. It saves time to them, and in this method, it is somehow based on psychological principle. Because of this thing, students easily they overcome their stress and pressure of learning language. In this method, students learn slow and gradual way. Using practice-based learning. One of the advantages is that practice-based learning. Practice-based learning. Speech-oriented. Next one is that foundation for communicative competence. It is a foundation for communicative competence. if you see, it is a foundation for communicative competence. This method is foundation for communicative competence. Advantages of direct method. What are the advantages of direct method? It is a natural method. It gives fluency of speech. It improves pronunciation, use of audiovisual materials, application of multiple techniques, practice-based learning, and foundation for communicative competence. It means that if you follow direct method at the time of teaching, if you follow direct method at the time of teaching, this method it becomes a foundation for communicative competence. That's why we let's say it is a natural method, because in if you apply this method in your classroom, your students easily learn language. They are not in any stress and pressure. There is no need of rule and description, there is no need of translation, and there is no need of explaining everything in detail. Slowly, gradually, and systematically, your students they follow the natural order of language learning, and they learn both language skills and language aspects. And next thing is that this method, direct method, it gives priority to fluency of speech, and you learn the real language instead of knowing the rule of language. Instead of understanding the structures of language alone, you learn to use language in real situations. That's why use of language in real situations, possibility of use of language in real situations, use of language in real situations, and application of language learning in both inside and outside the classroom. You have to say use of language in real situation, situation based language learning. You have to see use of situation based, use of language in real situations. Let me see, use of language in real situations. What you have to see, use of language in real situations or real context. You become capable for this thing. अहिले पनि हामीले हेर्ने हो भने what do we feel, कलेजमा ब्याचलर पढेको स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू, हाम्रो प्रब्लम इन द कन्टेक्स्ट अफ नेपाल, यु फिल इट, बिएड पढेको स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू, बिए पढेको स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू, दे क्यानट स्कोर गुड मार्क्स इन SAT exam, in IELTS exam, in other exams. But when you find the students who did BBA, BBS, BSc Science, these students, they easily excel in English. They have better English than the real students who did Bachelor in Major English and who did MA in English. The students, instead of these students, the students who do not belong to language department, they are performing well. It is all because of real use of English in real situations, use of English in real context, because they do not focus rules. Science students, doctor, medical students, students who come from engineering background, nursing background, medical background, other finance background, and other business oriented backgrounds. These people, they never read grammar books, they never read article, they do not read transformation of sentence, they do not pay attention to passive voice and reported speech. But look at them, they are excellent, they are excellent at speaking language, they are good at using language, they don't feel discomfort. It means that the foundation of learning is different. If you follow grammar translation method alone, you never gain communicative competence, you never use language in better way, you feel discomfort, you feel uneasy, you become overconscious, you become hypersensitive, and you become pre-conscious of possibility of making errors. If you are overconscious of the possibility of having errors, mistakes, and all these things, you cannot use language. That's why the good thing of direct method is that in direct method, this method improves pronunciation. This method depends on audiovisual materials. This method relies on application of multiple techniques. And under this method, students get a number of opportunities for practice-based learning. And this method is a foundation for communicative competence and use of language. This method prescribes, this method demands the use of language. Even at the time of learning, you had to use language in real situations and real context. It is the demand of direct method. And let's talk about What are the disadvantages then? What are disadvantages of direct method? There are many disadvantages. It is costly, it takes time, it requires experienced and qualified teacher. All teachers they cannot teach through direct method. What are the disadvantages? Disadvantages. First thing is that need of experienced and qualified teacher. Average teacher they cannot teach through this. Need of experienced and qualified. Need of experienced and qualified teachers. Need of experienced and qualified. Under this method, we need experienced and qualified. There is a need of efficient teachers. Useful only for heavy emphasis on speaking. This gives heavy emphasis on speaking. Another bigger problem of this is, and other things are neglected. Other language skills are neglected. It gives heavy emphasis on speaking. It means that listening, reading, and writing are mostly neglected in it. And this is linguistic useful only for linguistic minded students. Useful only for competent and linguistic minded student. Linguistic minded students. You have to say that this method is useful only for competent and linguistic minded students. This method is useful only for competent. This direct method is useful. If you are not competent, let's imagine a situation. If you teach only through and by English language, even at primary level, how do your students understand language? This method doesn't allow you to use Nepali language. This method doesn't prescribe you to use native language. If you use only second language, target language, or English language, even at your primary level, how do your students comprehend your teaching? This is a question. That's why this method is appropriate only to competent learner. This method is useful only to those students who do have linguistic mind, whose mind is composed in such a way. If your mind is composed in such a way, only then you can use this method. Otherwise, this method is useful only for linguistic minded students. It is another demerit of or another disadvantage of this method. And next one is that it requires an time consuming. This method take time. It is time consuming method. Direct method. It is a costly approach. This method is costly and need of variety of teaching materials. Need of a variety of teaching materials. Need of a variety of materials. Under this approach, you need a variety of materials. There is a need of experienced and qualified teachers, heavy emphasis on speaking, useful only for competent and linguistic minded students. This method is time consuming, this method is costly, and there is a need of a variety of materials. If you want to teach through direct method, you need to use variety of materials. That's why direct method is somehow, it is not economical one. This method is not suitable. It requires competent teachers. Need of competent teacher is another things. And this method gives overemphasis on oral skills. And this method only supports limited vocabulary and need of skilled teachers and inconvenient in a large class. This method is not useful, inconvenient in large class. You have to say this method is inconvenient in large class. You have to see inconvenient in large class. No grammar teaching. This method doesn't teach grammar. Our negative point भनेको in this method grammar is not taught. And another thing is that in this method discrimination among students. There is definitely discrimination among students. Qualified learner, students who have quick brain, and other students who have slow brain, discrimination is created between them. If you learn quick, if you are a smart learner, if you understand content in a better way, there won't be any trouble to you. That's why this is an inconvenient. Inconvenient is in large class, no grammar teaching. This method doesn't give priority to grammar teaching. This method doesn't give priority to grammar teaching and useful only for competent and linguistic minded students. And this method is not suitable for average students, not suitable for average students, and deliberate avoidance of other skills except oral skills. Other skills are denied in it. That's why this method ignored. Ignorance of written activities, ignorance of writing activities in the classroom, ignorance of writing activities. It is a time costly. It requires excellent, competent, qualified, and well-skilled teachers. At the same time, not useful for slow learner. Not useful for, you have to say, not useful for slow and average learner. Slow and average, and you can also say below average learner. It is, this method is not for these things. That's why these are the disadvantages of direct method. These are the disadvantages of direct method. Okay. Then what do we do in the classroom? Teaching techniques of direct method. What we do in the classroom under direct method? Classroom techniques of direct method. Now see the next question. Classroom techniques of direct method. What you do in the classroom when you follow direct method. Classroom techniques of direct method. Classroom techniques of direct method. What are the classroom techniques of direct method? What are the classroom techniques of direct method? Classroom techniques of direct method. Classroom techniques of direct method. Classroom techniques of direct method. Direct method को classroom techniques के हो. What are the classroom techniques of direct method? The first one is reading aloud. Reading aloud. What are the classroom techniques? The first one is reading aloud. Question and answers. In this classroom, you have to question and answer exercises. You assign reading activities to your students and you expect them to respond to the questions given below the passage. Under direct method, reading aloud is necessary. When students they read passage, story, drama, any kind of literary text or any kind of comprehension passage, they improve their pronunciation, speaking, vocabulary, and speaking fluency as well. When you read aloud, you improve your fluency. When you read aloud, you understand vocabulary, you understand grammar structure, you gain overall linguistic competence. That's why reading aloud activities are conducted in it. Next one is getting students to self-correct. You ask your students Getting students to self-correct. You do it. Getting students to self-correct. This is necessary. Conversation practice. In classroom, conversation practice. Conversation practice. Next one is group discussion. In classroom, you conduct group discussion. Next one is what you do. Next thing is that picture description. Picture and object description in the classroom. Picture and object description. You do picture and object description in it. Next one is you do picture. Next thing is that dictation. Dictation is also conducted. Dictation. And next one is paragraph writing. Paragraph writing. These are the different. Under direct method, what does a teacher do inside the classroom? If you teach through and by direct method, what you need to do in the classroom? You have to join your students in reading aloud activities. You have to assign them different passages for reading comprehension. You must make your students improve their grammatical error, and you must join them in self-correction activities. Next thing is that conversation practice. You have to join your students in conversation practice. Next thing is you have to conduct different kind of group discussion activities so that your student could gain speaking ability. Next thing is that in the classroom, you have to conduct picture and object description. And next one is detection and paragraph writing. These are the different things. These are needed. These things are needed if you teach by applying direct method. These are the specific classroom techniques that we need to do. When you use this kind of these types of classroom activities or techniques at the time of teaching, your students, they improve. They improve listening, they improve speaking, they learn grammar, they learn group discussion, and they learn real use of contextual learning, or they use real application of contextual learning. All these things become possible if you teach through direct method. That's why direct method is somehow better than grammar translation method, but it is not a complete modern approach. There are so many other approaches and methods of language teaching that have been developed on the foundation of this method. Okay, it's a clear word. Is it clear? Bujhnu? Did you get my points? Liar. Already. के छ, क्लियर छ कि बुझ्न गाह्रो त छैन नि? सजिलो छ। वास्तवमा संसारको सबैभन्दा सजिलो विषय नै इङ्ग्लिस। ल, थ्याङ्क यू फर योर पार्टिसिपेसन है।
सर आज सकियो हजुर?
सक्यो सर, सक्यो।
ओके सर। फेरि केही साथीहरुमा जानकारी छ? हुन्छ हजुर।
नयाँ साथीहरु हुनुहुन्छ?
केही साथीहरु हुन्छ ल, यहाँ केही कमेन्ट छ भने म हेर्छु। ओके, क्लियर भन्ने कुरा ल। ओके साथीहरु, सबै सरमेमहरुलाई एकमुष्टमा स्वागत छ। अब